I'll be using two screens today, so if I look above the screen, I'm not just staring at the ceiling. I'm looking at notes on another screen, so don't worry about that. Okay. So yeah, I guess before I start, really, it's kind of important to point out that throughout the presentation there'll be loads of really nice fossil photos and a lot of illustrations. So just wanted to thank Mark Whitten for all the sketches that you'll see throughout the presentation, and then all of the contributors to the Jurassic Coast Collection so far. It's their incredible fossils that you'll be seeing. So yeah, thanks to them. So paleontology on the Jurassic Coast, the World Heritage Site. So the Jurassic Coast was recognised for inscription as a World Heritage Site based on its paleontological interests. So we can kind of tease out some of those sort of more recognisable sites. So the Lower Lias in Lyme Regis, the Triassic material in East Devon, the early Cretaceous, Purbeck, etc. And all of these sites were recognised at the time of inscription, so about 21 years ago now, for their contribution to historical scientific research. So whilst the importance of the site's paleontology is well defined within the science, establishing its role within World Heritage Site status and what that means to us as individuals and how we connect with those fossils is slightly more challenging and slightly more nuanced, really. So as I say, this creates certain challenges. More can be done to improve access to important fossils from the World Heritage Site. So this kind of spans across the board, really. So we've got some really exceptional fossils that have been found locally that are currently stored in international national museums within the storerooms, for example. So more could be done to improve access to some of those specimens, but we won't typically see on display. The same with private collections, for example. So there are some truly staggering fossils that exist in private collections, but currently very few means by which to allow members of the public and interested academics, etc., to engage with those fossils. So that's kind of all part of the project. We're looking for better emphasis on their unique role in the story of World Heritage Site. As I say, improved mobilization of stored specimens to connect with local communities and improved access to specimens held in public collections. So as I say, if you were to identify kind of the purpose of the Jurassic Coast Collection, the function that it plays within World Heritage Site status, that's to identify a globally important collection of fossils which demonstrate the outstanding universal value of the Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site and improve access to and engagement with these fossils. So that's kind of our goal. And then as the presentation goes on, I'll break that down and show how we're aiming to achieve that. So the opportunities that the Jurassic Coast Collection presents. First and foremost, it's capable of providing a new and important evidence base for scientific research. So that's kind of developing and building on its historical significance to help identify and deliver on areas of specimen acquisition. So another kind of really important element of the project is ensuring that as and when fossils become available for sale, we're prepared and we understand the importance of securing those fossils in perpetuity, which means within a public collection. To promote further investment and support for the creation of new facilities that expand our capacity to conserve and curate this fossil heritage. So there's long been discussion around the need for new and dedicated facilities that focus on the exceptional fossil record of the site. So the Jurassic Coast Collection is one of the first steps towards demonstrating this need and actually understanding its wider context. But I'll get onto that a little bit later in the presentation. And then to encourage public interest in and recognition of the existing network of local museums and visitor centres which hold exceptional fossil collections and do an incredible job disseminating that information and sharing that excitement with the wider public audience. So how did we decide what fossils to include in the Jurassic Coast Collection? And this was a fairly difficult process that we went through and a fairly rigorous process, because obviously if you imagine the site spans 95 miles of coastland, it's been collected nearly continuously for about 200, just over 200 years now. So you can imagine that the range and the sheer volume of fossils that we have to deal with is enormous. So we decided that given the need to progress the project at pace, that we would try and narrow down those areas of interest that we focused on in the first phase. That's not to say that that will be the end of it. So we will look to expand what we register and the material we consider later on in the project. So in the first phase, we focused on key paleontological interests outlined in the nomination document. So when we were inscribed as a World Heritage Site, several of the most important fossil collecting localities and paleontological localities were identified, and that formed the basis for our nomination. So as I say, this includes really key sites that we would expect, so the Lower Lias, the Triassic, for example. And they were described in detail within the Geoconservation Review series. So this was some work that basically outlined their historic contribution to science. It gave details of the site, and it gave details of their potential to continue to yield important fossils. And it includes historically and scientifically important fossil sites. So there's the full list there, just in case anybody was interested. So as I say, most of them are geographical based or moderately geographical. So the Purbeck Group fossil forests, the Purbeck Group vertebrates example, but others are broken down a little bit more biologically. So ammonite zonation, for example. So when we were assessing the resource, we anticipated that this would that these fossils and these collections would break down into three main areas. So that's key scientifically important fossils, so new species or specimens that are likely to represent new species, or those kind of really wow examples, so complete dinosaurs, insects, Lagerstätten type preservation, which is exceptional preservation. And those were kind of a real priority for us, really, to keep a record of. Scientifically important fossils, this is a much more broad category, and it includes stratigraphic collections, scientific databases, and comparable inland material, because the strata that we have on the coast, the fossiliferous strata, doesn't just stop once you leave the coast. And there are some amazing opportunities to compare how things change laterally and geographically by looking at the same strata. And culturally important fossils. This is a unique element of the project, which really focuses on the cultural and the socio-cultural elements of the World Heritage Site. So we've all kind of heard the story of Mary Anning, for example, and a lot of that connection is personal and it's emotional. And so there's a real kind of nuanced approach here to take to recognize that fossils and artifacts associated with fossils have an importance all of their own that needs to be captured. So to do this, we use the significance assessment process. This is a tool used widely in museums to assess the importance and the significance of items that they're considering for accession into their collections. So it's intended to limit subjectivity. Periodic review by recognized experts will make sure that we've made the right decision and that the collection continues to be relevant. And as it says, it's a geoheritage project that uses these museum tools applied to a World Heritage Site rather than just an individual or private collection. So there's a bit of nuance there that gives us some freedom, really, to work with the material that we want to. So for example, if we were to repeat this process in a museum, we wouldn't be able to access privately owned fossil specimens in the same way that we're able to, because it encapsulates the importance of the World Heritage Site rather than a single existing collection. So as I say, the inventory seeks to collate existing information for one new purpose, to describe the significance of Jurassic Coast fossils in the context of the World Heritage Convention. So that's what we're kind of constrained to do. So when we break down those parties that are involved in the Jurassic Coast Collection and those people that might be interested in participation, we typically look to the partnership that exists within the World Heritage Site and the key stakeholders that have an ongoing concern with paleontology from the site are museums and visitor centres, academic researchers, and private fossil collectors. So those are the kind of the three pillars that uphold the Jurassic Coast Collection, really. So museums and visitor centres obviously have extensive and significant collections of fossils that have been found locally, and they store those in perpetuity. They curate and conserve them, but also they're there to engage with the public audience at the coalface, so it's called, to make sure that people can share and enjoy the importance of the World Heritage Site. So recently we've had expansion of museum facilities in Dorset and the development of new facilities like the Regis collection, which have exponentially increased our capacity to conserve and curate the fossils in a really sustainable way. So that's great. We're really kind of, the museums and the visitor centres are yeah, really doing a great job there. So the opportunity for museums, so we anticipate that the Jurassic Coast Collection will be a way to develop their own projects, pursue funding, and identify opportunities to collaborate with other Jurassic Coast Collection partners. We will use it to help identify and support priority areas for specimen acquisition to improve existing collections and promote further investment and support for ongoing conservation and curation of important fossils, because that's a really important kind of factor of the museum role. So as I say, you can break that down. So museums typically look to three areas of sustainability. And so the first one is organizational sustainability, and I won't go through each of these, but this basically looks to ways to continue the work that museums are doing going forward. And as I say, this covers all sorts of areas such as opportunities for joint programming and ways to categorize and identify the strength of existing museum collections. The second one of those is collection preservation. So there are lots of opportunities here to unite private fossil collectors and public museums, for example, to improve displays and to have access to private fossils, increase specialisms by focusing acquisition policies, and as well things like the opportunity to attract potential new volunteers, perhaps studentships with skill sets specific to curation and preservation of collections to improve that overall picture. And the final one is user experience and engagement, and that falls down to how the public interact with museums and with public collections. So as I say, there's a lot of opportunities here to increase public awareness of the existing museums on the World Heritage Site, make specimens that are currently held in storerooms, for example, accessible, and all of that kind of good stuff. As I say, the other element of that is collector engagement with the Jurassic Coast Collection. So I'm sure there are a few fossil collectors probably in the audience. And fossil collecting on the World Heritage Site has always been recognised as a core element of site conservation. So we're fairly unique in that in the world, and particularly amongst other World Heritage Sites, in that we acknowledge the role of and advocate for the role of private fossil collectors and responsible private fossil collecting. So we, as a World Heritage Site, have recognized that the main risk to these fossils on the eroding coastline is erosion. So it's the sea pounding in on the winter's days, or cliff falls, etc. And so we really value the role of private fossil collectors in rescuing that material, recovering that material. And then the impetus is then shifted to making sure that that material is rescued from the beach. And then we can look in the future at ways to get those fossils into public collections. So as I say, the passion and commitment of collectors is an integral cultural and societal element of this World Heritage Site. You know, it dates back to Mary Anning, the Philpott sisters, etc. All of these kind of household names that made their living collecting fossils on the site and have contributed immensely to the advancement of paleontology. So the opportunities for collectors, again, it's really important to demonstrate how collectors contribute to the conservation and management of the World Heritage Site. It establishes scientific and educational value of specimens, particularly those that have been found by private collectors. Once we can find a way to bring those into public collections so that they can be accessed by scientists. We have the opportunity to promote ambitious exhibitions of Jurassic Coast fossils, as well as things like fostering new relationships and looking forward to the future, understand the role of those privately owned fossil collections with regards to the development of a new facility that's dedicated to the World Heritage Site and dedicated to its exceptional fossil record. So I thought it was just would be poignant to kind of pick out a few entries from the Jurassic Coast Collection so far, just so that people can see some nice pictures of fossils. So this one just at the start is a Dipedian fossil fish. This was found by Jane Soule. And yeah, it's just a truly fantastic fossil. This is interesting because it's preserved obviously in association with a large piece of driftwood and several ammonites. And so from this, we can work out the kind of relative timing of deposition, etc. Another area, so one of the kind of really important areas of scientific discovery from the World Heritage Site at the moment actually is the Triassic reptile fauna of East Devon, and that's being worked on by scientists at Bristol University, particularly Rob Coram and Mike Benton, and Rob has found some truly fascinating fossils from areas near to Sidmouth are being described and published on by the university there. So as I say, there's several new species have been described or are currently being described from the site. It's redefining the global significance of our local Triassic rocks, and there are extensive future engagement opportunities there to really connect the local community with those fossils. I've just pulled out a couple of pages here, so this is a good point to say that if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about the Jurassic Coast Collection and see some more amazing fossils, if you go over to the Jurassic Coast website and search for the Jurassic Coast Collection, I've just released a year one report, which is a kind of roundup of all the work that we've done with a lot of the nuance, a lot of the discussion from the early stages of the project. And these are a couple of pages that I've pulled out from that document, and they identify some of kind of my favorite discoveries that the scientists at Bristol University there have made. So the top left is a species called Capus bentoni, and those kind of really colourful images on the left are CT scans of that specimen, and it's kind of really advanced our understanding of the role of preparation and the role of scientific techniques in fossil recovery, because from CT scans we've been able to kind of understand this fossil in a lot more detail than we otherwise would have. And just below that is the CT scan skull of a juvenile rhynchosaur. So yeah, that's probably my favorite. That's fantastic. And then on the right hand side is a new species that's just been described from the bones that are highlighted in the figure there, and that's called Paralosaurus karami, and that's named after Rob Coram, the chap that found that in East Devon. So yeah, I thought those were kind of really interesting specimens to just pick out and highlight. And of course the Lower Lias, so probably the most collected fossiliferous outcrop in the UK, potentially one of the most studied in the world. It's been subject to intense academic study and private fossil collecting for really over 200 years, but there is still a huge potential for ongoing discovery. Ichthyosaurs, obviously, so this is a specimen from David Soule's collection. It's been 3D acid prepared by the late David Costin, who was a master of his craft. And this specimen, sadly, you can't tilt that photo and rotate it, but you can see into the skull, into the cranium, the sclerotic rings, for example, of freestanding, and that shows the kind of the role and the significance of local skills that are developed in the fossil collecting community with regards to preparation, really. This is another one from the local Lower Lias. This is a collection of insect fossils. It's found by James Carroll. And James decided long ago that he wouldn't focus on the reptiles or the kind of the big finds at Lyme Regis. He really dedicated himself to the insect assemblage. And given that the Lower Lias is an exclusively marine environment, the preservation of these remains is utterly staggering. So James has updated me that the number there, 380, is actually out of date. It's probably closer to 550 now. And James's collection has specimens, when viewed under magnification, that really will just blow your mind. They include the eyes, mouth parts, ornamentation, color patterns, the fine hairs on some of these fly wings, for example. it's likely that James's fossil collection contains many new species, and gives us a really unique opportunity to understand the evolution of this group. You know, one of the most important, or if not the most important, faunal group today. And we can identify how they've evolved and changed over the last 195 million years. And I think that's really truly staggering opportunity, really. And so if you look at the pictures there, the one on the left hand side is a cricket, and to my mind it looks exactly like you've got a modern cricket and squashed it. So yeah, let's say some really amazing opportunities there, and a bit of nuance for the kind of project, really. So a happy coincidence that arose by uniting and connecting different fossil collectors. So as I say, James had identified a potential new species of water bug, but because it was just the wing, it was very hard to identify and ensure that it was a new species. When we looked through alternative insect fossils in different collections, we stumbled across this example in David Soul's collection, which is actually that specimen, which was fairly difficult to describe from an isolated wing in full, and that's a really large specimen. It measures about 1 inch across, and it's a complete water bug from the Jurassic. And of course, ammonites, it wouldn't be complete without some pictures of some fantastic ammonites, particularly the one on the right hand side there, which is an Apodorosaurus. And this really shows the advancements in recent years that have come from improved preparation techniques and the advocation of fossil collecting on social media, for example, which has popularized it beyond belief, really. So this bed was often ignored and not really considered by commercial fossil collectors, particularly up until about 5 years ago. But with new preparation advancements, this one was prepared using a technique called iron powder abrasion, we've been able to re-look at these lesser collected horizons and understand their potential a little bit more. And it's really exciting to think that in a few years, by looking at these underrepresented horizons, we'll be able to learn more about you know, some of the most famous rocks in the world. The development of the Jurassic Coast Collection, it's well worth pointing out that fantastic ichthyosaur in the background was found by Fian Smithwick, who's a notorious collector on the Jurassic Coast, absolutely fantastic fossil collector. And that specimen blows my mind, really. That's a really amazing specimen of ichthyosaur, and demonstrates the importance of getting some of these fossils in the public eye, where they can be enjoyed by everybody. So ongoing paleontological conservation. So with our recent advancement of the Jurassic Coast Collection, we've established it as an ongoing core conservation value of the site. So typically the Jurassic Coast Trust had hosted an Earth Science or Heritage and Conservation Manager, and we've now isolated those roles a little bit and recognized that paleontological conservation on the site is a much larger field and needs its own dedicated staff member. So that's why I was employed. So if we go on. So a bit of kind of recent good news is we've just been awarded a John Ellerman Grant Foundation grant to continue to deliver this work. So that's great. And it's going to provide us the opportunity to offer curatorial support to local museums that have expressed a desire to collaborate and for assistance, to use the Jurassic Coast Collection as a tool to drive areas such as collection rationalization, curation, growth, etc. of existing public collections, to create a digital platform that allows us to share the Jurassic Coast Collection globally, probably in the form of an online digital museum, for example, and to investigate long-term security of important fossils, particularly those held in private collections from the World Heritage Site. So I'll pick that up just a little bit more. So recently we announced our commitment to delivering a feasibility study that establishes the needs and opportunities regarding a new centre on the World Heritage Site dedicated to its exceptional fossil record. And so that work will be delivered by a working group, and that will be through an open recruitment process, which we're hoping will go out at the end of the month. So I would encourage anybody that's kind of interested and would like to really form a part of that development going forward, to apply for those roles. And there are subject-specific roles for each of those stakeholder groups. So there's a certain number of places for academic researchers, for local and national museums, and for fossil collectors, in order to bring the partnership together and make sure that this is a really kind of well-connected and holistic approach to this work. And then our commitment to deliver on the outcomes of that feasibility study. So that's a really kind of exciting development, and yeah, recognizes the hard work of fossil collectors and researchers and museum staff over the last 20 years to really deliver a secure future for fossils from the World Heritage Site. You could summarize the next 2 years really within 3 developmental objectives for the Jurassic Coast Collection. So I've outlined them here, and that's to improve public access to and engagement with fossils through programming, digital content and exhibitions, to support the management and sustainability of existing public collections, and to address the acquisition and long-term security of privately owned fossils. So that's really what we'll be focusing on over the next 12 and 24 months. And then, yeah, as I say, I've just kind of isolated a few of the key deliverables there. So recognition and support regarding capacity and funding requirements for priority acquisitions. We're looking at establishing a series of exhibitions to celebrate our 20-year anniversary since inscription as a World Heritage Site. Opportunities for paleontological research initiatives, continued registration of fossils from those GCR sites that we outlined earlier, but also elaboration on those and finding ways to incorporate different paleontological features that weren't necessarily included in that initial nomination process. A review of the geographical collecting bias in order to identify where we perhaps need more work, or where we could encourage the fossil collecting community to dedicate some time in order to develop those areas. As I say, and then the development of an online platform and early scoping work for long-term security. So I think that's kind of the end really. So it's a lot to take in. I understand that, but I think kind of a nice exercise, and something that I would encourage everybody to do this evening perhaps, is to try and establish what outstanding universal value means to you, or consider what the outstanding universal value, the World Heritage value of the site means on a personal level. So there's a real need to develop our understanding of outstanding universal value on the Jurassic Coast. Is it solely scientific, or does it span and incorporate all of those kind of social and cultural elements and historic resonance with local communities? And which of these do we follow? Which of these do we prioritize, if any, or is there room within a development such as the Jurassic Coast Collection for both of these to sit comfortably? So I think that's something that's yeah, really important to consider. I think that's about me done. So I will stop the share, and then if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chris. That's a really fascinating talk there. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question for Chris, if you're on the Zoom call, could you pop it into the chat box? And if you're on the Facebook stream, if you could put it into the comment section. Whilst we're waiting for questions to come through, just a reminder, we've got 2 more talks for this evening. One is the spirals in time. What can ammonites teach us about life in ancient oceans? That's with James Witts of the University of New Mexico. And at 6 p.m. we have Michael J. Benton from the University of Bristol with talking about his new book, Dinosaurs, The New Visions of a Lost World. So the questions, we have a couple of questions from the Facebook page from Noah. I think possibly talking about the 3D skull. Where was that skull from?
So that's from Charmouth, Lyme, Regis. That was found in 2 pieces, and it was just kind of rolling around at the base, I think, of one of the landslides there.
Wow. And the other question, I think I might have missed this. It said, what is a rhynchosaur?
Oh, a rhynchosaur is I would when Michael Benton gives his talk later, I would suggest asking him for a more comprehensive description of a rhynchosaur. But it's an early Triassic. I want to say reptile, but I think they fit into a group that's not kind of quite that distinct. But yeah, it comes from Sidmouth in the Triassic terrestrial deposits there.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions from Phil James. He'd like to be unmuted, so bear with me 1 second. I just need to find him on the system here. And Phil, I'm just asking you to unmute now, so you should be able to.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Hello, Chris. It's Phil here,
Phil.
Southampton. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, very, very well indeed.
Good. I love I love the map behind you. That's a very fitting, geological map there.
Ramsey, 1859. Yeah, great presentation and great to hear firsthand about the JCC. There's a couple of things that come out of that for me is how are you tying that in with the Dorset Fossil Collecting Code, which has been in existence for 20 odd years, and has obviously a register of fossils that have been collected over that period, category 1, category 2. And your JCC is obviously a very modern take on that, and probably the Dorset Fossil Code, whilst it's been really good in its inception and continuation, hasn't really sort of kept up with things. I'm very keen to get this merging together of private collected material and in the public sphere. And I just wonder, for example, are you, say, re-looking at all the category 1 fossils that have been recorded, trying to see what's happened to them now, trying to get photographs so they can be put on to the JCC site? Really pleased to see that some of David Soul's fossils are on there, and Lizzie as well. So sort of trying to tie these two things together. I wonder how that's been looked at.
Yeah, so that was something that came up really early on in the project, is how these two exist within the same sphere. So and it's something that gets asked quite regularly. So the West Dorset Fossil Collecting Code is at its core a management tool. It will never disappear, and it will always run parallel to the Jurassic Coast Collection, because at its core, the West Dorset Fossil Collecting Code is based on the legal transfer of ownership from the landowner to the fossil collector. So by abiding by the terms set out within the Fossil Collecting Code, legal title of that fossil is transferred to the fossil collector, and it records information that provides a background on those fossils, and it records also information about their availability, etc. To donation to museums, etc., etc. So there will be an element of the project, and it's something that I'm working with the Heritage Centre and have looked at with the Heritage Centre around contacting individuals that have registered material with the West Dorset Fossil Collecting Code and the new National Nature Reserve Fossil Collecting Code, in order to see whether they would be happy for those specimens to also be registered with the Jurassic Coast Collection. But the should never be, and simply because of the two functions, that if you were to register something with the West Dorset Fossil Collecting Code, it should also be registered with the Jurassic Coast Collection. And that's something I would never want to put on something, because as I say, the West Dorset Fossil Collecting Code is something that you have to register important fossils with in order to get good legal title to them, whereas the Jurassic Coast Collection is a voluntary, more kind of aspirational project with different overall objectives. Some people often ask the purpose of the Jurassic Coast Collection when we already have the West Dorset Fossil Collecting Code. That's a question that comes up quite regularly, and one that I kind of, it's a good opportunity to address, is that the West Dorset Fossil Collecting Code and the registrants within that will never form the basis of of a development, because the West Dorset Fossil Collecting Code is obviously geographically limited to West Dorset, so it doesn't incorporate some of the fantastic fossils that we've got from East Dorset or from East Devon, for example. It's also time limited, so it doesn't obviously include fossils that were found prior to the introduction of the codes. If you take Monmouth Beach, for example, and we were to just use the Monmouth Beach fossil collecting code as our record of important fossils from Monmouth Beach, we would only know of things that were found in the last 3 years. But also it doesn't ascribe significance in the same places that we would. So in order to register a fossil with the fossil collecting code, it has to be either a category 1 or a category 2 scientifically important fossil. Whereas we've branched that out to incorporate culturally significant fossils or historically significant fossils, etc. So there's definitely room and something that we're looking at to tie those two schemes together and ensure that they're shared really cohesively and that there's a good partnership there. But one could never replace the other. I think they take different roles.
But is there an ongoing desire to, perhaps, I don't know what's happened to all those specimens since. One hopes that people have adhered to the code and they are still safely in private collections, etc. I guess it would be nice to know what's happened to them and whether some of those could be brought onto the JCC photographically, like some of David's there. That I mean, I've seen the fish before, and it's staggering. Things like that is beautiful to look at, because I think, to be honest, to excite the public, the aesthetics come into this as well, not just maybe the importance or historical and all the rest of it. So it's a real combination of things, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Jolly good. Thank you for that, Chris. Very kind.
That's okay.